I'm a Rottweiler competing with a bunch of greyhounds.
Robyn Benincasa has started and finished this race 3 times before.
Ironman taught me how to be hard, how to be just mentally hard and to suffer. And I took that and brought it to adventure racing. And I'm spent.
They have traveled here from every corner of the world. For 10 non-stop days and nights, they must hike, mountain climb, paddle, ride, and race through some of the most captivating yet dangerous terrain in one of the last great wilderness areas on Earth.
Last summer in the leech-infested jungles of Borneo, Robyn's team brought home the Eco Challenge Championship.
We have the Eco Challenge winners. They are on the roof right now. That's Ian, Robyn, Mike, and Isaac. How you doing, guys?
And I want to ask you guys, what was the toughest part?
It was just so mentally hard. I remember one night in particular, we were laying on the jungle floor with not only bugs crawling around beneath us, but leeches falling from the trees onto us like rain.
Oh my
ping,
God.
Ping, 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 all over us.
Oh my God.
This is the world's toughest adventure race.
Hey, everybody, welcome to my studio. Thank you for that awesome intro, Gail. That was lovely. And I didn't realize that you decided to become a badass endurance athlete after seeing me speak. So
yes, we were in Houston and somehow I signed up and I am so glad I did. I want to tell everybody about our trips, but before, I'd love for you to give the listeners here today a snippet, a feel for what you talk about in terms of teams and world-class leadership and teamwork, and kind of how you do that from the stage.
Okay. So back in the pre-COVID era, my sort of the main keynote that I most often did was called Building World-Class Teams. And that was about the 8 essential elements that create amazing human synergy, about how we're better together than any individual could ever be alone, and how that kind of magic is created. And that was wonderful and amazing. It was all based on my crazy sport of adventure racing. And I totally started speaking by accident. Fast Company magazine actually called me to speak at a reader conference after they did an article about our team called Extreme Teamwork. And that's how, the whole thing started. So I've been kind of a really authentic, rubber meets the road, teamwork and team building speaker. And then once COVID hit, there were a lot of people that were kind of saying, you know what, my team needs a lot of inspiration. We're really digging deep. It feels like we've been trying really hard, for a long, long time, and people are tired. They need to be inspired. They need to be uplifted. They need to be motivated. And we want to do this together as a team. We want to stay connected, even though we're never in the same place at the same time anymore. And so I took a lot of the concepts from my team building presentation and moved it into a presentation that I've been calling Adapt, Overcome, and Win as One, or Why Winners Win. And it's about that mindset that allows us to build and lead the kind of world-class teams that continue to succeed year in and year out against the toughest of odds, no matter what crazy challenges you're facing. So I will do a little bit from Adapt, Overcome, and Win as One, but there's just a ton of crossover between the building world-class teams and Adapt, Overcome, and Win as One. So, all right, let me just start by saying, if there is one thing that every one of you knows right now, it's that change is the only thing that's going to stay the same in your world, right? It's really how we all respond to change that dictates our success. So how do we as winners and leaders build and lead the kind of teams that adapt, overcome, and win as one through times of incredible challenge and change? Well, I want to share all this goodness with you today in the most fun and hopefully entertaining and inspiring way that I can. And that's using some examples and stories from my super silly, ludicrous sport of adventure racing. Now, I know most of you have probably never heard of adventure racing. And if you think you've heard of it, you might be thinking of The Amazing Race. So I'll give you the scoop. It's a sport that was invented by a crazy Frenchman, and it involves small teams of men and women. You have to have 1 man and 1 woman on each 5-person team, so mixed gender teams. And the race director will ask you to meet them in the most remote place they can find on Earth. And they hand each team a set of maps and rules. And the next morning, they say, ready, set, go. We'll see you guys in 600 to 1,000 miles. Whichever team gets their first wins. And it's all non-motorized transportation like kayaking, mountain biking, whitewater rafting, mountaineering, and the clock never stops. So if you sleep and when you sleep is all part of your team strategy. So the winning teams will get like usually about an hour and a half of sleep every 24 hours and be racing the rest of the time. But as if the physical part isn't even hard enough, here's the real kicker. Everyone on the team has to stay together within 50 yards of each other from start to finish. I mean, there's not that many people like in our own families you want to spend that kind of special quality time with, right? And if one person on your team quits, entire team is disqualified. So based on the rules of this crazy sport and the fact that we couldn't say that we were a success unless all of our teammates, and in your case, your clients, customers, vendors, partners, suppliers, families, also cross the finish line with you, which sounds very familiar to every one of you. As you can imagine, the most important thing that we learned out there had nothing to do with sports. What we learned is that the secret to success is to play less as an individual and more as a team. As a coach, as leader, you play not your 11 best, but your best 11. In other words, a lot of the magic really happens for us when we inspire individual superstar team members to also be great teammates. So do any of you want to be an adventure racer when you grow up now, aside from Gail, after that charming description? No, of course not. You're all way too smart for that. And you have real jobs, like with paychecks and everything. But guess what? Although none of you will ever enter an adventure race on purpose, boy, sometimes doesn't an adventure race enter our world? Because tell me if this isn't all of your lives right now. I know this for a fact, this is all of your lives. You all have small teams of men and women who are trying to navigate your way through totally uncharted terrain in pursuit of what feels like an impossible goal, working against extreme time pressures and constantly changing and challenging conditions, and with a tiny little goal of not just falling across the finish line, but of crossing the finish line among the best of the best in the world. Yeah, hi, adventure racers. All right, so how do we adventure racers adapt, overcome, and win as one in times of incredible challenge and change? Well, I'm going to share a few of those keys to that breakthrough performance, actually 2 of them with you today. And the first is that all great winners and leaders are consistently ruled by the hope of success versus the fear of failure. Where you focus your energy and intent, that is whether you're playing to win versus playing to simply not lose, leads you to 2 completely different finish lines, doesn't it? Next time you're faced with a difficult challenge, think about where your brain goes and hibernates. Are you a person that kind of lives in what are my fears, my concerns, my obstacles, my worries, and you kind of stew around there for a while? Or are you a person that says, yeah, I've got all this craziness going on. Guess what? I still have to get to my finish line. Everybody is counting on me. I just have to find a more creative, more innovative way to win. Now, I learned this lesson the hard way from my buddy Ian, and this was the first time I raced with what was about to become the best team in the world. And we're in Ecuador in the big world championships called the Raid Gauloise. And for 6 days, we're at the front of the pack with the top French team, Team Intersport, which is kind of a theme throughout all of my presentations in these years. It was us against Team Intersport because the French invented the sport. And we were the first international team of like Americans, Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians, South Africans to ever challenge them at this crazy game that they created. So we had like a fun sort of friendly rivalry with Team Intersport that over the years became, okay, best way I found to describe our relationship with Team Intersport is if I have Seinfeld people. Do I have Seinfeld fans? I know I do, of course. So ultimately, we in Intersport had kind of like a Seinfeld-Newman kind of relationship. I totally digress. All right, so for 6 days, we're at the front of the pack with them. We can't shake them and they can't shake us. Day 7, we started 3 days downriver to this finish line. And it started with each team in a whitewater raft. So we jumped in ours, they jumped in theirs. And my brain had operated on fear of failure my entire life. So where do you think my focus was? On them, right? Were they gaining on us? Were we going to lose? So as we were going down the river, I would paddle, 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 turn around, paddle, 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 turn around. I did this every 5 minutes for hours, seeing if they were gaining on us. And finally, my buddy Ian, who was sitting behind me in the boat steering, he was so annoyed by where my focus was on simply not losing that the next time I turned around to see where they were, he was so mad. He took his paddle and he threw it down on the boat. And he grabbed the top of my head, which was facing backwards. And he physically spun my head back around to face forwards downriver. And he leaned over and in my ear, he said, "Winning is that way," which means a lot more to me now than it did then. But there was a guy on the other side of the boat, though, my buddy Steve Gurney out of New Zealand. And Steve has one of those amazing MacGyver type brains. Like this guy could totally build a space shuttle in his own living room. He started thinking about the resources that we had in the next transition and what it was really going to take to win. And when we got to the next transition area, the race director took away each team's whitewater raft and handed each of us 2 inflatable canoes. So our competitors grabbed their canoe paddles, jumped in their canoes, and they were gone down the river. And Steve turned to all of us. He said, "Hey guys, hold up. I got an idea. I want to get our climbing rope out of our gearbox. And I want to tie our 2 boats together." This had never been done before. He wanted to tie our 2 boats together end to end using our climbing rope through all the D-rings on the outside of both boats so he could make one big long boat. And then he said, "And why are we mentally stuck using canoe paddles? Just because these are canoes. We're a much stronger kayaking team. And we actually have our kayak paddles in our gearbox for the next section of the course anyway." But nobody had ever thought to use kayak paddles in these canoes before. Now, you guys know the difference between the paddles, right? Canoe paddle is a single blade. A kayak paddle is a long stick blades on both ends, and you swing back and forth with it. They are literally 2 completely different sports. So we were much stronger kayakers than they were. We got out our kayak paddles and we made them longer to fit around the edges of the canoes. And between those 2 things, tying the boats together and switching out the paddles, we ended up creating what we called the Steve Gurney missile. And we put that sucker out of the water 40 minutes behind our competitors. And I was totally freaking out, and it was a huge, big risk. But sometimes with big risk comes big reward, right? And believe it or not, they actually caught the Steve Gurney missile in action. I'll let you guys see what happened.
They head into the raging whitewater of the Rio Tawachi River. Team Spivak and Yo launches first. 13 minutes behind the leaders, Solomon Presidio heads downriver. Solomon Presidio charges forward, determined to catch the leaders before the transition to the sea kayaks. Team Solomon Presidio pulls up on the beach at Same. They will soon become the first American team ever to win an international adventure race.
Much too long. Oh yeah, Robyn, you're an awesome woman. You got us to the top of the mountain.
This is a moment they will never forget. But the moment has lasted 9 days.
How awesome is Steve Gurney? Like, truly one of the smartest humans I've ever met. So Steve was kind of like the OG of what we call like industry disruption or continuous improvement or operating in the white space. I mean, every race, Steve would do what we all did, which is read what was in the rules. But more importantly, Steve would have a lot of deep thoughts about what wasn't in the rules. And I swear he came up with something more creative and brilliant every race. Like actually the race after this one was in Patagonia, Argentina. And unfortunately, my team was racing against Steve's team, which you never want to do. And he had done a lot of research and he could see that at the start line, there were a lot of big lakes and a lot of strong winds. So he started practicing. And this race started with a 100-mile paddle across this lake system. And we're probably about 30 miles into it, and Steve's team is 50, 60 yards ahead of mine. And then we all feel this big tailwind coming up behind all the teams. And then we see the tailwind hit Steve's team. And the minute that tailwind hit his team, all of his team members threw their paddles down and we could see them scrambling around in their boats. And about 1 minute later, we see this. They launched a huge kite surfing kite. Steve had figured out how to tie 2 kayaks together and pull them with a 9-foot kite surfing kite, which he then did for the next 4 hours while his team ate and slept and got ready for the next section of the race. All right, the race after that, Washington State, we had to get kayaks 12 miles down a road. So we thought we'd be pretty brilliant and bring wheels for the back of our kayaks and put our running shoes in the boats so we could run and pull the boats down the street. So we pull up, putting the wheels on, putting our running shoes on. Steve's team pulls up. They're putting wheels on their kayaks too. But guess what they're pulling out of their boats? Rollerblades. Yep, kicked our butts again. So the big question is, what is your next Steve Gurney missile going to be, right? In your life or in your career, creating a Steve Gurney missile is all about taking what you're already great at, your core strengths and talents and your background and experience, and your creativity and your agility and your amazing resources and your great teammates, and saying, you know what? I'm not just going to find a way to tilt the game board in my favor or my company's favor. Maybe I'm going to find a way to completely change the game or change the way the game is played. In that race, we couldn't shake them for 8 days. In the 9th day of the race, we put 2 hours on them with the Steve Gurney missile. And it was really that moment when somebody said, hey gang, what if we do what it takes to win versus simply not lose? That changed everything. Great winners and leaders also always help their teammates focus on the comeback, not the setback. Now, I had a small medical setback about 8 years ago. I discovered I had end-stage osteoarthritis in both my hips. So over the last 8 years, I've had 6 hip replacements because the first 4 failed. Yeah, I'm that person that they're looking for in those commercials, right? Like if you've had failed hip replacements, call the law offices of that dude and that guy. Yeah, cheers. And that's my parts. And now we are all BFFs, aren't we? You know, but I share these crazy metal hips with you guys because they ultimately led me to a couple of really neat things. I was always inspired by the Chuck Yeager quote about how you back up but never give up. So after my first hip replacement, I thought, okay, adventure girl, what are you going to do now? And the first thing I realized was I probably need a new sport because I wasn't going to be a good adventure racer anymore. But I always loved the kayaking sections in the races. That's where I felt my happiest and strongest. But I didn't really know whether the guy behind me in the double kayak was providing most of the motor or how much motor I was providing. So I decided to take a whack at being a solo ultra endurance kayaker and to focus on what I could do instead of what I couldn't do. So for my first trick, I set out to break the current Guinness World Record for longest distance paddled by a female in a kayak in 24 hours. And I went up to the Yukon River in Canada when it was 24 hours of light and I broke that record and my record still stands. So I had to be a goober and show you guys my certificate. All right, so after that, I thought, well, maybe I have a new sport here, but I hadn't really raced against other humans yet. So I decided to enter my first big race. And I entered the longest nonstop paddling race in the world, which is called the Missouri River 340. It's a 340-mile nonstop paddle from Kansas City to St. Charles down the Missouri River. And I know I should have started with something shorter, you know, but I brought my adventure racer brain to paddling. And whereas most of the competitors in that race kind of assumed you had to sleep every night because that's what they'd all kind of always done. People would pull over on the banks and take a nap for a couple hours. I know I'd raced for about 3 days without sleep before. So I just blew through the whole thing. And when I got to the finish line, my poor husband, AKA Honey Bunny, bless his heart, had to physically pick me up out of the boat. And when he picked me up, he said, oh my gosh, I'm so excited you were second. And I said, oh, I can't believe I'm second woman in my first big race. I was so excited. And he said, no, you don't understand. You were second overall out of all 111, mostly male-powered solo boats in the race. And you guys, I've actually been second place there overall now, as of 2 Julys ago, out of 324 solo boats, 5 times. It's awful. There's always one guy that beats me, and it's always a different guy. I can't even wait for the one guy to stay home one year. It's awful. But I'll tell you what, it really is cool to be up there, you know, on the podium with the best of the best, you know, in another sport. But the neatest thing that these crazy metal hips led me to was the coolest thing that's ever happened in my life. And that's the inspiration to start the Project Athena Foundation. And we were super thrilled and honored to become one of the CNN heroes a couple of years ago. And I will let this little video tell you about it.
I initially got hurt in 2005. I had 46 surgeries in attempts to salvage the leg. And I finally decided on amputation. A lot of people view it as a loss, but I got my life back.
Very often people are saying, okay, I survived, but now what? And we want to be that now what? Good job, lovelies. I was a world-class adventure racer. In the World Championships, I hit the deck and the doctor said, you're never going to run again. I've had 4 hip replacements. After my first, I said, I'm just going to put something on my calendar so that I'm still training for something. It just makes you realize it's not about the setback, it's about the comeback. So I thought, let's do that for other women. Athena! I started an organization that helps survivors of medical or traumatic setbacks live an adventurous dream as part of their recovery. This is about you going out there and being the badass that you are. You're a strong kid, Allie girl.
I was in a place of such uncertainty, so finding the website was such a message of hope to me. Here was this group of women who understood it on a different level.
Athena girl! Being an Athena, you're not just a survivor, you're an adventurer. We give them a different label to put on themselves, and it's something they become on their way to the finish line.
It's the best thing in the whole world. And the reason that I share it with you awesome people is because I know some of you may know a survivor that we can help live her adventurous dream as part of her recovery. Or part of his recovery, by the way. We started taking male survivors too a couple years ago. And instead of Athena, we just call him Zeus. But we not only take survivors on our 5 big annual adventures, we also take fundraisers, just like Gail, who we call our gods and goddesses. And they do the adventure right alongside the survivors every step of the way. And guess who our gods and goddesses are? People just like you guys. Yay. I know you're super excited. But honestly, if any of you are crazy wild hair to come with me and other normal cool people on a great adventure for a neat cause, like hiking all the way across the Grand Canyon in one day, or kayaking and riding bikes from Key Largo to Key West over 3 days, which we're leaving for in 48 hours, or hiking 45 miles all the way across Zion National Park, you don't have to all rush to the website to sign up. I can see that you're at the edge of your seats. How do I get started? We'll have coffee, we'll talk. But you know the deal, right? I mean, sometimes something happens in your life or in your career or in the world, and you look back a couple of years later and say, you know what, in some crazy ways, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me or happened to us, because we're here in this better place now, and look at everything we've learned. In my case, I would have never discovered paddling or started Project Athena if I had more cartilage in my world. So I am kind of grateful for that all the time. Because remember, you will never be defined by your setbacks. You will always be defined by your comebacks. All right, and then of course I have a big ending with everybody leaving the start line with their own world-class team, all as one. And I do a final countdown and we leave 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And everyone is at the start line for their next big adventure races. And back to you, Miss Gail.
Oh, that was great, Robyn. See what I mean about that energy? You too will be signing up. I want to say one thing about Project Athena that I think is really important. When you sign up, either as an Athena or as a goddess, you get a coach and you get a 20-week training plan. So you are so prepared, and you show up and you're in the airport with all these strangers, and 2 days later you have friends for life. So it's been very rewarding for me, and I hope to do it again. Hey, Robyn, we have a question from someone who's on the call. She's done 3 Ironman and she's done 3 adventure races, and nothing as challenging as an eco challenge, but she's curious, when do you just determine when your team is going to sleep? And she said this conversation can also pertain to business. So she's just curious how you make that decision.
Well, for us, those kind of decisions were actually pretty easy because if you have one person that's kind of lost the plot, as the Kiwis say, lost the plot, that you can usually just kind of put them in the middle of the pack and keep them moving along while they sleep, daydream, eat, do whatever they got to do. If you have 2 people that have lost the plot and one of them is one of your navigators, that means you got to take a rest for at least probably about 1 REM cycle, which is about an hour and a half-ish. And then you have your brain back together. But yeah, it was just, and it was kind of basically on the team captain or who the most awake person was at the moment to kind of make those calls. Like, if we're firing on 3 cylinders, we're okay. If we're firing on 2, let's start looking for a place to sleep.
Awesome. Hey, Robyn, one of our mutual favorite friends, Allison Levine, is on, and she just put in the chat to everybody that she really recommends Robyn's book, How Winning Works. And I think she's also added a question for Robyn. What was the darkest time you ever experienced during a race, and how did you emerge from it? That's from Allison.
Oh, Lord have mercy. Well, actually, in the first big race that we ever won in Ecuador, we had to summit a 19,700-foot active volcano in the middle of the race. So we had already run 75 miles at 14,000+ feet to even get to the starting hut, which was at 15,000 feet. And it was an out and back to nearly 20,000. And I was a complete train wreck by the time we even got to the 15,000-foot hut. And my O2 sat was 70%. The doctors checked all of our O2 sat, and mine was 70%. So if I were home, I would have been going like to the hospital lights and sirens. And not only like I was completely blue, I was completely dehydrated. All of our water had frozen. And I was a train wreck. And then we still had that out and back to get to 19,700 feet. And because we all looked so bad in that moment, the top two teams that came into the hut, the race director said, as long as you get 3 people to the top and back, you can still continue in the race. It was the first time they broke from having an entire team have to stay together. So I assumed, of course, that I was going to be a person that they were going to leave at the hut, even though I didn't want to. I was a train wreck. I didn't think I could go any higher. And as we were going out the hut, all roped up for travel, the doctor took one more look at us and said, her O2 sat is still 70%. You need to leave her here. And I said to the team, can you just drag me like halfway up and I can roll back down, and then we'll probably get less of a penalty. So they dragged me to 18,000 feet, and I thought I was going to roll back down. But instead, I had 2 teammates discover they had high altitude pulmonary edema at 18,000 feet. So the doctor at 18,000 feet was sending them down. And my teammate came over to me and looked in my eyes, and he said, guess what? You're not going down. You have to go up, or we're out of the race. And I had 104 plus fever. We all of us had high altitude pulmonary edema, or the beginnings of it. Totally dehydrated. Now I had an O2 sat that was way less than 70%. And I discovered I had to continue climbing to 20,000 feet for our team to even stay in the race. And I was at such a low moment that I literally just disappeared. I couldn't even comprehend what was going on, but it was all about the team. Honestly, like for me, at the end of the day, the things that you would never, ever, ever do alone, I just had to borrow. I had to borrow all of my courage from the 2 guys I was continuing to climb with. And they put their arms around me and they said, don't worry, we're roped together. You know, you go, we go. And I just trusted them, and I believed in them, and they believed in me. And it was that whole, believe in someone beyond reason. And when you believe in someone beyond reason, they start believing in themselves. And boy, did that team believe in me so far beyond reason. It was ridiculous. And not only did we survive, getting to 20,000 feet, coming back down, we actually went on to win the race after all that, when we were this close to being disqualified. But it was all the team.
Yeah. Stronger together than we are alone, for sure. Robyn, I've loved this. And for all of you watching, if you have interest in bringing Robyn in to speak to your organization, let us know. As you can see, she's got the full studio set up, and so she can do virtual events. And she's also out traveling, doing in-person events. So either or, give us a call. We'd love to check her calendar and bring her in for your group. And maybe you and others on your team will be inspired to do a Project Athena trip. Thank you so much, Robyn. Really, really, really appreciate it. And to all of you, I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. We're going to take a break in December for the holidays, and stay tuned for details on what we have planned for 2022. It's been a great year. Thanks, everybody. And have a nice Thanksgiving.